The last decision making is to shut down or continue operations. What do you mean by shut down? Because, well, before we move on to the important terms, there are companies who are, well, unprofitable. Like, for example, their subsidiaries are very unprofitable. Let's say, for example, the fast food of um, Dulcinea of Jollibee Food Corporation. They became unprofitable, so the corporation, or rather the board of directors, are considering whether to retain or shut down the operations of Dulcinea. So that is what we're talking about here, because we're considering if the advantage of shutting down, or rather the cost of shutting down, would be favorable to the overall profitability of the company. So let's move. So that's one example for shutdown or continue operations decision making. Now, what do you mean by shutdown? It is a temporary cessation of operations due to certain unfavorable circumstances. It does not eliminate all costs such as depreciation, interest, property taxes, rent, insurance, maintenance costs, and may give rise to additional expenses such as security maintenance, etc. Shutdown cost, meanwhile, is a reduced fixed cost during shutdown period plus expenses related to shutdown. Now, the formula for shutdown costs is equal to the sum of unavoidable fixed costs plus additional shutdown costs. Next is the shutdown savings. It is the fixed cost under normal operations minus shutdown costs. So this is the basic formula. Shutdown savings is equals to fixed cost for continuing operations less the fixed cost if you shut down the operations, or fixed cost if continue less the sum of unavoidable fixed costs plus additional shutdown costs if any. Finally, shutdown point. It is the point at which losses from continued operations are equal to the cost of shutdown. Now you have to compute the contribution margin per unit to compute the shutdown point. It's like a break-even point. It is very similar with this break-even point when you say shutdown point. Now shutdown point is equal to shutdown savings divided by this contribution margin per unit. And these are the breakdowns, breaking down the shutdown, the basic formula into two more. Now just familiarize yourself here. Next slide. Now what is the decision rule? If the demand is equal to the shutdown point, loss is the same regardless of the decision. If the demand is greater than shutdown point, continue operations to minimize loss. While if the demand is less than the shutdown point, shut down to minimize loss. That is the decision. Now, let's illustrate this. A company anticipates slack sales for the next 6 months. It is projected that the sales in that period will be 2,500 units. The company sells a single product at 60 pesos per unit with a variable cost of 40 pesos per unit. The fixed cost is 240,000 pesos annually. Should the company close temporarily, the fixed cost for the 6-month period will be reduced to 30% if that happens, but additional cost of 1,000 a month will be incurred. Should the company shut down or continue operations? We'll see and we'll find out later on as we answer this problem. Now, in answering this problem, we have to identify first the important information in our decision here. Now, the demand, which is 2,500 units because it is a projected number of units that will be sold for the next 6 months. Now, the selling price, which is 60 pesos per unit, the variable cost of 40 pesos per unit, as well as the fixed cost, annual fixed cost of 240,000 pesos. Now, should the company close temporarily? So, if we close temporarily, then our fixed annual fixed cost will be reduced to 30% for the 6-month period only, but we'll get an additional cost of 1,000 a month in that. And so we have already identified the relevant information that we're going to need. And so it is already in bold letters and numbers, so
You can easily identify it already. Now, let's move on to the computation. Now recall that the formula for the shutdown, or rather, the decision here is that we need to compute for the shutdown point in units and compare it with the demand in order for us to make a decision. So recall the discussion earlier about the decision for shutdown. Now, with that, let's compute first the shutdown cost. Now, the shutdown cost is the reduced fixed cost. So it's 240,000 annual fixed cost times the 30% of it times the 6 over 12, since we're just considering for the 6 months, and so we'll get the 36,000 pesos. Now the additional cost, which is 1,000 times 6 months, 6,000, I'll get the sum, and we'll get a total shutdown cost of 40,000 pesos. Now the contribution margin per unit, 60 pesos selling price less the 40 pesos variable cost, and we'll get a contribution margin per unit of 20 pesos. Now recall that the formula for the shutdown point is here. Shutdown point is equal to shutdown savings less CM per unit. And so this is the breakdown of the formula. And so we can already compute for the shutdown point. We'll just consider the fixed cost if continue less fixed cost if shutdown all over divided by the contribution margin per unit. And here is the computation for the shutdown point, 120,000 pesos. 120,000 pesos came from the 240,000 annual fixed cost that is divided by the 6 over 12 since we're just considering for the 6-month period. Now let's into the shutdown fixed. Now the total shutdown cost we have computed earlier, 42,000, and divide the difference by the contribution margin. I will get a 3,900 units of shutdown point. Now, with that, we can already make a decision. Recall that the demand for the shutdown, or rather for the 6-month period, is 2,500 and the shutdown point is 3,900 units. Hence, the demand is less than the shutdown point. The decision is to shut down to minimize loss.